morning. Subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to the first hearing of the 116th Congress. We're going to look at strategies to improve the U.S. maritime and shipbuilding industry. It's an honor to chair this crucial subcommittee. Look forward to working alongside our maritime community, including the Coast Guard. The subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation and its predecessors has been around in one form or another throughout the history of our country, supporting all of our maritime activities. I'm privileged to assume the mantle of responsibility. I look forward to working in a genuine bipartisan manner with all of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, with Ranking Member Gibbs, so we can write a new productive chapter in this subcommittee's history. And I really mean that, and I really want to run this committee in a way that is bipartisan and that is participatory. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to recognize and thank the members of the Coast Guard in particular for their actions during the recent government shutdown. For the first time in our nation's history, members of an armed service force were not paid due to a lapse in appropriations. That was unacceptable and something we cannot allow to occur again. To the men and the women of the Coast Guard, you deserve an apology from your government for what we put you through. And I, for one, am happy to deliver it. I don't think it's productive to get into a blame game here, except to say we appreciate you, we appreciate your service, and we should not have put you in that position. And I know a lot of us are committed to never doing so again, and we have some ideas on that as well. I also want to remember, in particular, Chief Warrant Officer Michael Kozlowski, a Coast Guard member who died in a tragic accident while on duty in January in Alaska. Mike Kozlowski dedicated his entire adult life to protecting our country as a member of the Coast Guard, and his service will not be forgotten. Our thoughts go out to his wife, Bree, and to his children. And I want to thank in particular Admiral Schultz, the Commandant, for joining me at the funeral in Mahopac, New York. It was not just Mike's hometown, it's in my district. It's about 10 miles from where I live. So we felt that loss in the Hudson Valley. It was close to home. So we appreciate Mike and his family. We lift them up in our prayers. And again, thank you to all of the members of Coast Guard who attended that beautiful service. It was really a wonderful opportunity for me to see firsthand that the Coast Guard works as a family. And we should act as members of your family on this committee, even as we ask tough questions and do our jobs. Now, of course, one cannot overstate the importance of our nation's maritime industry. Every year, over $4.6 trillion worth of commerce flows through our maritime transportation system, and it's rapidly becoming more complex. Increases in the amount of cargo being shipped and the size of the vessels carrying that cargo challenge the industry and agencies responsible for its oversight. Similarly, new technologies are moving the industry forward while also creating new vulnerabilities and challenges that must be addressed. So my hope is that this hearing will begin a dialogue to identify constructive, pragmatic strategies to protect, enhance, and expand the U.S. maritime and shipbuilding industries. Since 1789, Congress has passed laws to help keep the U.S. merchant marine competitive in the global economy and to maintain a military sea lift and shipyard industrial capacity necessary to ensure our national security. Durable maritime statutes such as the Jones Act, Cargo Preference, and the Maritime Loan Guarantee Program have been supplemented by new program authorities, such as the Maritime Security Program, Small Shipyard Grant Program, and the Military to Mariner Initiative. The Jones Act first came into effect as part of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920 to encourage the development of a strong merchant marine for both national defense and economic security. The Jones Act requires that merchandise and passengers being transported by water between 2 points in the United States must travel on vessels that are built in the U.S., owned and manned by U.S. citizens, and registered or flagged in the United States with an endorsement by the Coast Guard to participate in the coastwise trade. 91 United Nations member states have similar laws to the Jones Act, which are called cabotage laws. Some maritime nations are expanding the scope of their cabotage laws despite the proliferation of global free trade agreements. For example, last year Russia enacted a law requiring that all domestic and international shipments of oil, natural gas, gas condensate, and coal extracted from Russian territory and loaded on vessels along the North Sea route must be carried by Russian-flagged ships. Despite other countries' cabotage laws, some free trade critics continue to attack the Jones Act as unnecessary and unhelpful to the U.S. economy, but we cannot become complacent in our defense of the Jones Act, which remains a critical component of U.S. maritime strategy. Another critical component of that strategy is the U.S. Merchant Marine, the fleet of U.S.-flagged commercial vessels and civilian mariners that carry goods to and from, as well as within, the United States. These vessels are operated by U.S. licensed deck and engineering officers and unlicensed seafarers. A significant portion of U.S. mariners are nearing retirement age, revealing a potential future shortage of available and experienced maritime professionals that could impact military sea lift and weaken U.S. Maritime commerce. A point I expect Admiral Busby will make today. Maritime stakeholders are aware of this looming workforce attrition and have expressed concern that more should be done now to expand this highly trained, dedicated, and proficient labor pool by any means necessary. So it's imperative that we examine every opportunity to grow and diversify the U.S. Mariner workforce, including making it easier for separating military members to enter the maritime workforce and identifying ways we might better leverage the capabilities of state maritime academies. In addition to facilitating commerce in times of peace and war, the U.S. Merchant Marine acts as a naval auxiliary to deliver troops and war material to military operations abroad. Throughout our history, the Army has relied on U.S. flagged commercial vessels to carry weapons and supplies and ferry troops to the battlefield. During Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, U.S. flagged commercial vessels transported 90% of sustainment cargoes moved to Afghanistan and Iraq. That is an extraordinary number. But the U.S. flag fleet in the foreign trade has shrunken to the point that it is a remnant of what it was just. We must do more to address the competitive imbalance that exists between vessels operating under the U.S. flag with vessels operating under foreign flags of convenience. Additionally, we must do more to generate new cargo. Cargo is the lifeblood of the maritime industry. Without more cargo, there's no need to build more ships. And without new ships, there's little need to hire more mariners. I would like to learn more about what options or strategies we might consider to address these two fundamental challenges to the security and success of the U.S. maritime industry. So we are joined here today by experts from the U.S. Coast Guard and the Maritime Administration, as well as professionals from many sectors of the maritime industry. Welcome to one and all. We appreciate your being here. I look forward to hearing from you on how we might strengthen this indispensable sector of the U.S. economy. I'd like now to call on the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Gibbs, for any opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Maloney. First off, procedural question. Representative Garrett Graves from Louisiana, I just request that you ask unanimous consent that he can sit in.
Yeah, I think you're asking for unanimous consent on that. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Welcome, Mr. Graves.
Thank you. He's just stepped out. He'll be back. Thanks, and also I'd like to offer my condolences to the family of the Coast Guardsman lost his life, and also I want to thank our men and women in the Coast Guard and our witnesses here today for the great work that they do and great service to our country, to protecting our citizens of our country, and also providing more safety on all the lakes and open seas. The U.S. maritime industry directly or indirectly employs more than 475,000 Americans, providing nearly $29 billion in annual wages. There are more than 40,000 commercial vessels currently flying the American flag, not counting the 35,000 vessels U.S. fishing industry fleet. The vast majority of these vessels are engaged in domestic commerce through roughly 80 U.S. flag vessels continue to operate in international trade. It is estimated that the U.S. maritime industry accounts for over $90 billion in economic output each year. Beyond the important contributions to our economy, U.S. flagships, U.S. licensed mariners, and U.S. shipbuilders are vital to our national security. The U.S. military relies on U.S. flag commercial vessels crewed by American merchant mariners to carry troops, weapons, and supplies to the battlefield. We cannot rely on foreign vessels and crews to provide for our national security. We must maintain a robust fleet of U.S. flag vessels. I think I keep saying vehicles there, don't I? Vessels. I'm landlocked, I guess. Right. And a group of skilled American mariners and a strong shipyard industrial base. I'm interested in ways in which we can promote the U.S. fleet through more efficient and less burdensome regulations, as well as increased investment. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses on ways in which we can further promote the U.S. flag fleet and create more U.S. mariner jobs. And thank you. I yield back.
Got it. I'd like at this time to ask unanimous consent to enter a statement from Chair of the full committee, Pierre DeFazio, which he is not able to deliver in person. Hearing no objection, will be entered in the record. Well, at this time, I'd like to, Mr. Graves with us? No. Well, then at this time, I'd like to invite And welcome our witnesses for today's panel. We're joined today by Rear Admiral John Nadeau. Am I saying your name correctly, sir? Neto. Neto. I was told it rhymed with Maddow, which I was hoping would irritate the Republicans on the committee, but that is not to be. Admiral Neto, thank you for your presence today. Admiral Neto is the Assistant Commandant for Prevention and Policy for the United States Coast Guard. We're also joined by Rear Admiral Mark Busby, who is the Administrator of the Maritime Administration. Thank you both for being here today, for your service to our country. I'd ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. Since your written testimony has been paid to the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. And with that, Admiral Neto, welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Gibbs, distinguished members of the subcommittee. It is my pleasure, really my privilege, to be here today to discuss the state of the U.S. maritime industry and the Coast Guard's role in advancing a safe, secure marine transportation system and enabling the uninterrupted flow of commerce. On behalf of our Commandant, Admiral Schultz, and the entire Coast Guard, I'd first like to express our gratitude for all of this committee's support to the United States Coast Guard. Thank you all. Thank you. The Coast Guard is the world's premier multi-mission maritime service responsible for safety, security, and stewardship of the maritime domain. At all times in military service, a branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, federal law enforcement agency, a regulatory body, first responder, and a member of the intelligence community. The Coast Guard operates in all 7 continents and across the homeland. Last October, the Commandant released his Maritime Commerce Strategic Outlook and outlined the Coast Guard's vision for enabling maritime commerce throughout our nation's marine transportation system, we call the MTS. The MTS consists of our 95,000 miles of shoreline and 25,000 miles of navigable inland waterways, and it connects our 361 ports. This MTS is marked with nearly 50,000 buoys and navigation aids that facilitate the safe and secure movement of thousands of vessels, any given moment, any given day, 24/7 by 365. It gives us unfettered access to 2 of the world's largest oceans. It links our nation's sheltered harbors and deepwater ports to those of other countries, and it connects our heartland, the nation's breadbasket, to consumers and markets all around the globe. The MTS supports $4.6 trillion of U.S. economic activity every year and sustains more than 23 million U.S. jobs. It is the most efficient, environmentally sound, and sustainable way to meet our nation's transportation needs both today and tomorrow. The MTS also enables our nation to project our military force. It allows the movement and logistical support of the U.S. military. With the MTS, our DoD brothers and sisters can be transported anytime, anywhere around the globe using U.S. sea lift, that is, on Coast Guard inspected U.S. flag ships that are manned with Coast Guard credentialed U.S. mariners. In short, the MTS is a gift to this nation, and the release of the Maritime Commerce Strategic Outlook reflects the Coast Guard's commitment to ensure a safe and secure MTS. And in honoring our commitment, we are pursuing precisely what this committee seeks to explore here today. That is, strategies to improve regulation, economic opportunities, and competitiveness in the U.S. maritime. At the operational level, the tragic sinking of the Alfaro was over 3 years ago, but the lessons we learned are front and center as we work to make needed improvements in our marine safety mission. It's not recording. Got it. That better? That's better. In the past year alone, we have established a new staff dedicated to reforming our oversight of third parties. We've prioritized marine inspector training. We've prioritized the hiring of civilian marine inspectors. We've increased opportunities for maritime graduates to join us and focus on the maritime safety missions. And we've developed new policy and training to improve our oversight of third parties who we entrust to work on our behalf. These actions and the mandates in the recently enacted Ham Alert Maritime Safety Act, which this committee helped draft, will help us address all of our third-party oversight responsibilities to include regulatory requirements under Subchapter M, which recently added over 5,700 towing vessels to the U.S. inspected fleet. It's a 50% increase. While pursuing all these recent initiatives, we've engaged stakeholders to understand their challenges. We're grateful for the outstanding relationships we have with the dedicated leaders across the U.S. maritime industry, including those of the American Waterways Operators, AWO, the Offshore Marine Service Association, AMSA, the Seafarers International Union, and the American Maritime Officers, SIU and AMO, and a whole host of other industry and labor groups that directly or indirectly, through our advisory committees, all provide us valuable insight, advice, and recommendations. In conclusion, a healthy maritime industry is vital to the nation's economic prosperity and national security. The Coast Guard's marine safety missions and our day-to-day operations to support these missions must continue to evolve with stakeholder demands. They must keep pace with industry change and ensure the safety, security, and environmental compliance in the MTS. We will continue to leverage the valuable support of our federal, state, local, and tribal partners. We will continue to be a common sense regulator, and we will continue to support any and all efforts to improve regulation, economic opportunities, and competitiveness in the U.S. maritime. Again, thankful for the opportunity to be with you today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Admiral Neto. I just want to observe for the record that you brought that within 2 seconds of the 5 minutes. That's impressive, sir. That's impressive. Admiral Busby, the bar has been raised, sir, on you. Thank you for being here. Please proceed.
Hi, good morning, and Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Gibbs, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss strategies to improve economic opportunities and competitiveness in the U.S. maritime and shipbuilding industries. The U.S. merchant marine, U.S. shipbuilding and repair facilities, our nation's port systems, and supporting industries integrate our economy with a global supply chain that moves more than 90% of the world's trade by tonnage. These industries, vessels, infrastructure, and personnel also play a critical role in our national security, supporting our ability to provide sea lift to the Department of Defense. The mission that Congress gave the Maritime Administration back in 1936 is to foster, promote, and develop the maritime industry of the United States to meet this nation's economic and security needs. Over the past several decades, our maritime industry has suffered losses as companies, ships, and jobs have moved overseas. As this valuable industry has eroded, our nation's ability to trade internationally using U.S. flagged ships has declined significantly. To address this multi-decade trend, MARAD is working with stakeholders to identify ways to strengthen our industry. In addition, MARAD continues to leverage its existing programs to support critical mariner training, improve port infrastructure, and help address environmental challenges. U.S. Strategic Sealift relies on a fleet of 61 government-owned sealift ships maintained in 5- and 10-day readiness status, plus ocean-going commercial vessels operating daily under the U.S. flag. Currently, 82 ships sail in that international trade, and 60 of those are enrolled in the Maritime Security Program. A domestic fleet of 99 large ocean-going self-propelled commercial vessels operating in Jones Act trade are operated by mariners with unlimited tonnage and limited horsepower licenses. All told, these commercial vessels form the primary employment pool for mariners with the unlimited credentials and training needed to meet the manning need of our nation's sea lift capability. Estimates indicate that less than 2% of the U.S. waterborne imports and exports by tonnage move on those 82 internationally trading U.S. flag commercial vessels. The last year in which a U.S. fleet carried at least 10% of our trade was in 1960, when the fleet consisted of well over 1,000 ships. U.S. flag ships must compete against foreign flag carriers that benefit from major subsidies, tax benefits, or state ownership. For example, one large foreign flag carrier that is wholly state-owned has received nearly $2 billion in state assistance over the last several years and will soon carry the single largest share of containerized imports to the United States. Absent such measures, U.S. shipping must rely primarily on cargo preference laws and the Maritime Security Program to maintain a level of competitiveness and help support the continued employment of American mariners. One of MARAD's principal responsibilities is to ensure a reliable flow of highly trained mariners available to satisfy sea lift requirements. We accomplish this through our nation's Center of Maritime Excellence, the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point, and through the 6 outstanding state maritime academies. And Rear Admiral Michael Alfoltis, president of State University of New York Maritime College, will address mariner training and greater detail in the follow-up panel. I'm extremely proud of the executive order that President Trump signed on Monday to address long-standing challenges to the transition of active duty uniformed service mariners and veterans into the merchant marine. In short, hiring veterans makes good business sense and enables our highly trained and motivated servicemen and women to continue to serve our nation's needs. In terms of shipbuilding, while the U.S. remains a global leader in naval shipbuilding, our large commercial shipyards are struggling to remain afloat, but for the Jones Act. However, U.S. shipyards have opportunities for growth. The expanding liquefied natural gas market, for example, presents a unique opportunity to strengthen our maritime industry. Another challenge is the state of our nation's gateway port infrastructure. The newest tool available to improve efficiency, for which we are most grateful, is the Port Infrastructure Development Grant funding authorized by Congress in the 2019 budget. MARAD's existing Marine Highway Program is working to develop and expand innovative services to better utilize our underutilized inland and coastal waterway system, which we expect will carry increasing levels of our nation's commerce in the coming decades. Finally, MARAD's Environmental and Technical Assistance, or META program, helps ensure U.S. fleet compliance and international environmental standards. Thank you for the opportunity to highlight MARAD's programs that support the competitiveness of U.S. maritime industry. I look forward to working with you on these challenges.
Thank you, Admiral Busby. Time to spare. We will now move on to members' questions. We will limit members' questions to 5 minutes, and we will start by recognizing myself. Admiral Busby, can you tell us a little bit more about the President's executive order that was recently signed? I think most of us support it and certainly support the goals of the President's order. I'm curious about your opinion about what kind of difference this is going to make around what time frames. Could you give us your best thinking on what we can expect from that in terms of the shortage of mariners we're looking at?
Chairman, thank you. I think this was a very positive and important step that the President. I think this was a very positive and important step that the President took on Monday, signing this executive order. For some time, we have been working with the services on a military to mariner program. And I know this has had a lot of congressional interest over the years, and it's this particular executive order helps smooth out that process and gives some assistance, some direction to the services to carry out some of the mechanisms that are going to enable that flow of transitioning uniformed personnel and veterans into the merchant marine. It provides direction to provide payment or waiver of payments for some of the applications, for instance, for TWIC cards. It directs the Coast Guard to conduct crosswalks with the services on a lot of the courses that are being people learn about in the military.
Excuse me, Admiral Busby. I'm being told that we're having a little trouble with the audio. If I could ask both the witnesses to just move the microphones closer to
Sure.
their mouths to speak directly into them, same for the members, so that we can have your testimony recorded. And we're also, dependent on these for any transmission of the hearing. So, excuse me, sir,
Sure.
Go ahead.
Okay. So to continue, we believe that this is going to have a positive effect on the ability for transitioning military members to come into the merchant marine. I don't think it's going to solve entirely our manning shortage, but it's going to help ease it in the future.
Right. I guess I was hoping you might bottom line it for me, though. Without other changes, do you expect this to keep it steady, slow the decline, reverse it? What's your best expectation?
I think it will be additive. It will help. It will help the situation. I think we're probably talking on the order of several hundred, probably per year.
But net, what are we going to see to that shortage? If it's 1,800 now, where will it be if we did nothing else?
It really is going to rely on the number of jobs that are out there. So it really comes back to ships. I mean, we can bring people in, but if there's not a place for them to be employed, it will only do so much, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And if you would, could you tell me a little bit about the role that the training requirements, the international training requirements, plays to the shortage of senior level mariners?
Well, Certainly, you know, the STCW requirements, which are on top of our national requirements that are set forth by the Coast Guard, add additional cost and time to a mariner as they attempt to maintain their license or upgrade their license. So what we see typically happen is at about the 10-year point, as junior mariners are transitioning to the upper ranks of shipboard hierarchy, they're faced with a decision to make. If they don't see employment, if they don't see opportunity for advancement because of you know, lack of ships, lack of jobs, some of them are reticent about making that investment, financial investment, and time investment to get those more extensive credentials.
Thanks, sir. Admiral Neto, could you say a word about LNG for me and the challenges with LNG bunkering? Have you considered implementing uniform guidance on regulations regarding LNG bunkering to ensure consistency and safety? Would you say a word about that?
Yes, sir, I'd be pleased to. We have been working closely with industry. LNG presents a great opportunity, particularly for operators that operate coastwise in the United States due to some of the conditions we have along our coastline that require them to use low sulfur fuels. We've seen great growth in this area for shipping, particularly the new build and recapitalization of the domestic fleet. We have worked with industry to use provisions in our regulations, because right now our regulations would not cover LNG as fuel, but we do have provisions in regulation that allow us to do equivalencies, and that's what we have done, where we have worked in partnership with industry and some of the class societies to, and as well as the IMO and others around the globe, to together work with them to develop a set of standards that are uniform, and we've done that both for the ships and as well as some of the infrastructure, and we have worked with them as well on the actual procedures and the handling and the bunkering. So today, in fact, we have ships operating out of Jacksonville, Florida, U.S. flag ships, go back and forth to Puerto Rico, that use LNG as fuel, and they bunker from a barge. We have ships that operate out of Louisiana that go in and out, operate in the Gulf of Mexico. They're offshore support vessels that have a bunkering facility there in Louisiana. And we see more development in the Northwest. And in fact, this week, I'm meeting with some industry folks that are looking to both have the cruise ship industry, which are building brand new foreign flag cruise ships that will operate out of the U.S. with LNG as fuel, and some of the operators that will then provide them with that fuel and are looking to do that via barge. So we are engaged, plugged in, working closely with them to make sure that our regulations are not an impediment to that, and that it's done safely, securely, to ensure that, again, that we protect the MTS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a similar question, but for Admiral Nadeau. Is the Coast Guard continuing to work with the Department of Defense to align training courses so that the military mariners receive the proper credit when they apply for civilian mariner licenses? So that's really a Coast Guard more issue, I think, question. That's why I asked you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that question. We are, in fact, working closely as we have been. The Coast Guard fills two roles, I guess, with the military and mariner. The one, we are a provider. We have active duty members that they choose to depart the service or retire. They then can use their sea time to seek a credential. And we also, as the issuer of the credentials at the National Maritime Center, we in turn also evaluate the coursework and figure out what can they get credit for. So to date, there's been almost 100 courses that have been approved. Those are courses, about a third of them from the Army, about a third of the Coast Guard, and the other third are from Military Seat of Command, the Navy, or NOAA. So we do work with them. We evaluate the courses to see how can we give them credit, how can we give them the maximum amount of credit for the experience and the training they've already received to minimize any additional burden that might be there.
Good, good. I want to make sure to get the alignment and everybody makes it easier. And
Absolutely. As I think Admiral Busby said, you know, we're trying to create a crosswalk to make it easier for people to really knock down any impediments that might be there.
Admiral Busby, MARAD has been working on a single document addressing both the National Maritime Strategy and the National Sea Lift Strategy. I also understand a draft strategy was completed in 2016, but subsequently is under review by the current administration. The original statutory deadline for the strategy was February 2015, but the deadline was extended in the National Defense Authorization Act of 2019 until February 2020. Will MARAD make the new deadline?
Mr. Gibbs, it's well beyond my capability to swear to you that it will be making it. It's our intention that we will. It's in interagency coordination right now to ensure that it meshes up with the other national strategies.
How many U.S. flag ocean-going vessels will have been lost between the original 2015 deadline and the new 2020 deadline? And how many U.S. mariners?
I would say that my anticipation is that we're going to be adding ships, sir, rather than losing ships.
Okay.
That's my intention.
Is it possible this strategy be released before February of 2020?
It's entirely possible. That'd be my hope as well.
Okay. Admiral, the National Academy of Sciences Committee on Polar Icebreaker Assessment recommends a completion of planning and detailed design before the start of construction. Where is the Coast Guard with regard to the completion of planning and detailed design and the start of the construction on the icebreaker?
Yes, sir. We're very grateful for the fantastic support we've had from Congress and the administration to provide us the funding to recapitalize our 40-year-old icebreaker and provide the nation the capability it needs as to expanding Arctic as those waters become more and more active. We, with the funding we received, the $650 million, we're able to move out, and if all goes according to plan, and it's going according to plan, we have an integrated project office set up with the Navy to make sure we incorporate best practices of both services in terms of acquisitions, and we would expect to award contract fourth quarter of this year, sir.
I guess to follow up on that, National Academy of Sciences and GAO recommends the acquisition best practices with the designs completed before the start of the construction of the polar icebreaker. Does Coast Guard plan to follow that recommendation?
Sir, I'm not the acquisition professional. That's probably something I'd have to take back and bring back to you.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with that exact recommendation that came out of the Academy.
Okay. Also, in 2018, towing vessels became subject to inspection under Subchapter M of Title 46 of the Code of Federal Regulations. Subchapter M provides the establishment of third-party inspections, the implementation of certificates of inspection, COI, and all applicable vessels, and a requirement for recurring compliance inspection or audits. How many towing vessels chose a third-party inspection regime, and how many chose the traditional Coast Guard inspection regime?
Well, sir, they don't have to actually declare which way they're going to go until they approach their COI. The regulations phase in the COI, Certificate of Inspection. It's only 25% per year. Currently, so we're only in our first year of implementation, but currently we have signals that about 60% of the fleet is, at this point, indicated to us they're going to go third party. Of the COIs we've issued to vessels to date, I'd say about 80% of those, maybe even more, have been to third party, those that use a third party option.
Did the Coast Guard receive any additional resources to conduct these inspections or provide oversight to third-party inspections? Did you?
So we got some resources a few years back, but nothing recently. We're working and trying to leverage third parties and do the best
How
to
you
manage
figure
third parties.
you can handle the workload?
We do the best. We could always use more resources, sir. We do the best at what we have and apply it and look across all the emissions we have, all the risks that are out there to make sure we're trying to address the highest risk as best fashion we can.
Yep.
And leveraging third parties is one way to get after that, provided we do proper oversight.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. You go back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Garamendi. I should add we're following a rule of seniority by arrival time at the committee. Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on taking the chairmanship of this committee. And Mr. Gibbs, you have a powerful team at the head of the podium here. Mr. Busby, Admiral Busby, you went through the issue of the executive order. You should take great pride in having pushed that through the administration, through the president's signature, and it's going to carry a long, long way. You also mentioned that it may not do a whole lot of good if there's no ships upon which those sailors or those veterans who would become licensed would be able to sail. Two issues specifically. One, which will be the subject of tomorrow's hearing in the Armed Services Committee. You'll be testifying, but I think we should be aware of it here because it is crucial to this question. And that has to do with the Ready Reserve. The ships are aged out, as you have said in your written testimony and in other forums. Could you briefly describe the need for the rebuilding, the new ships to replace the existing ships in the Ready Reserve fleets? And then I'd like to talk to you about your issue of the export of strategic national asset called oil and natural gas.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your question. Yes, the Ready Reserve Force, it's a 44-and-a-half-year-old average age fleet. That's old for ships. I mean, you know, in the commercial world, it's rare to see a ship beyond about 15 or 20 years. So these ships, which have very unique military capabilities, admittedly, are old. They need to be replaced. The Navy recognizes that. We recognize that. U.S. Transcom recognizes that. And we have a plan to try and do that, a three-pronged plan. The Navy has put this out. It's been out for about a year now. It talks about investment in some of the ships to extend service life where it makes sense, to recapitalize using newer used ships from the open market that have military utility and modify them in U.S. shipyards as required, and building new ships in U.S. shipyards. So those three sort of prongs or strategies to get us where we need to go. I think the quickest and most affordable way of those three prongs to get after it is probably going to be to get ships from the open market currently, modify them in U.S. yards, and put them to work in the RRF. And we're pursuing that strategy.
Thank you.
right
I'll
now.
go to the next question in just a moment, but to comment on that, of critical importance here is that these ships be replaced, and also that the American shipyards have a full role in rebuilding or repurposing ships that may be purchased, as well as building the new ships to replace those that are aging out within the Ready Reserve fleet. I would draw to the attention of the committee here this wonderful little place card that lays out all of this. It's very useful, and Admiral Buzzy, if you can make that available.
Happy
since
to
it came
make those
from you.
available to the whole committee.
Secondly, you described in your written testimony and touched on it in your oral testimony that there's an enormous market for LNG and for the export of it, as well as for petroleum products, principally oil, that America is an exporting nation in both of these strategic assets. There is a piece of legislation that we would hope you and the administration would endorse. It's called Energizing the American Shipbuilding Industry. It would require that a very small percentage of that export be on American-built ships. It's estimated that perhaps as many as 30 to 40 ships, perhaps more as the exports increase, would be built in American shipyards, as well as manned and womaned by American mariners. Would you care to comment on what that might mean to the maritime industry in the United States and our national security?
Yes, sir. Appreciate the question. As we look across the size of the fleet that we need to provide the right pool of mariners to meet our sea lift needs, we believe we're about 45 or so ships short right now to meet the manning needs. So to the extent that we can generate the cargo available for ships to be available to carry and to provide employment for those mariners that will be on those ships, I think that would be a step in the direction. We always talk about cargo as king, that we need the cargo first before we can get the ships. This is a natural cargo that exists now. We're a net energy exporter. We should be taking advantage of it.
Thank you, Admiral Busby. I will take this issue to the members of the committee, since it is central to the purpose of this committee, and ask for their support of the Energizing American Shipbuilding. Thank you.
Sir.
Yield back.
Thank the gentleman from California. If the gentleman would like to make a unanimous consent request that the two leave-behinds be entered as part of the record, I think that might be well received. Having a little trouble with my chair. Other than that, I think the hearing's going very well. Thank you.
We're happy to make
Forgive me,
copies
sir.
available.
So I know I'm also familiar with these documents. If members of the committee hadn't seen them, they are useful in terms of both the Maritime Security Program and the Ready Reserve Force. Ask that they be entered as part of the record without objection. So ordered. Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Nedow, in your opening statement, you noted that, quote, the Coast Guard has made a deliberate push to focus vessel owners on safety management systems, unquote. Can you explain what concrete steps you are taking to focus vessel owners on SMS?
Yes, sir, happy to do that. Again, in the aftermath of Alfaro, though the casualty was not, we know the casualty was caused by some decisions made by the master, we learned some other things. And I think it highlighted for us again just the value and importance of an effective safety management system on any functioning ship. So we have doubled down on efforts. We have conducted training of our own people. We trained over 100 people last year, some of our more experienced marine inspectors on safety management systems. We've developed policy, internal policy, to instruct our people how to get out and start looking after these systems. We developed policy for industry that talked about what we expect in their safety management systems. We've been working with our third parties and are in regular contact with them to make sure that they are doing what we would expect them to be doing. And in fact, we have stood up a brand new element within our Coast Guard headquarters that is focused solely on the problem of watching and monitoring the U.S. flag fleet and our third parties to make sure that we track and get after this. So I'm seeing some market improvements, but we're not done. We got more work to do.
One thing I've heard is that the safety inspection fees required by the Coast Guard can disincentivize companies from choosing the safety management system. The Coast Guard authorization bill last Congress gave you the authority to revise those fees after studying the issue. What's the status of that right now?
Yes, sir. We're thankful for the opportunity to go and look at those fees. They have been stagnant for some time, and that work is underway. We want to make sure that we do not disincentivize the idea of having a third party. That is an option under Subchapter M, as we spoke about earlier. We encourage, and I truly believe, that using a safety management system is the right way to manage the risk, particularly if you look to the future as things get more and more complex. The responsibility should rest with the operator. Coast Guard is on board at best once a year. I cannot ensure the vessel is going to be safe the other 364 days.
Yeah.
Operator can, with a good, healthy safety management system. We want to ensure we incentivize that, and we are taking a hard look at our fees that we charge to make sure it does so.
And I appreciate the fact that you guys are studying the issue. I just would like to sort of plant a flag, and hopefully at some point we can come back to the question of whether you think the current fee structure is sound. I just don't want to sort of lose sight of that. But by all means, study it in depth, and I look forward to following up with you at some point. Final question. The Coast Guard has allowed pilot compensation to increase, and check me on my numbers here, but I think by 20% in 2014, 24% in 2015, 14% in 2016, 13% in 2017, and another 8% in 2019. I've heard from my local stakeholders in the Port of Green Bay that these increases are unprecedented, they're unsustainable for ratepayers, taxpayers interested in moving waterborne freight in the Great Lakes. Is the Coast Guard open to reforming or deregulating pilotage on the Great Lakes?
Sir, I've been intimately involved. I learned more about Great Lake pilotage than I ever thought I would. Last year, I personally attended our public meeting we held up in New York. We brought all the people together to try and get after some of the issues we've had. I would welcome the opportunity to give you a more detailed brief on what we're doing there.
Okay.
And to answer your specific question, no, we're never opposed to getting a little smarter how we can better get after and serve, again, make sure things are safe, secure, and resilient. I would point out, though, sir, that the numbers are up. We do see that greater activity in the Great Lakes, even this year, and that there seems to be both more cargo and more ships. So I don't think that we're impeding anything, but I would not discount the fact there's always ways to improve. And
we'll have to get you to come to the Port of Green Bay at some point and hear from the local stakeholders there. We have the best cheese and beer in the entire country, so if that's not incentive enough, I don't know what is. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from Wisconsin and look forward to him bringing that to future committee hearings as is allowed under House rules. I'll put in a word for cheddar. Other members may have separate requests. Mr. Larson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. First off, I'd like to thank the Coast Guard team. I was with Admiral Schultz Friday night in Seattle as part of the recognition of the enlisted and enlisted reserve folks of the year, and we've got two great candidates for the national competition. And if I was voting, I'd vote for them. But we're just really impressed with the enlisted, active, enlisted reserve folks and the stories that they brought to everybody. And we should be really proud of the enlisted folks in the reserve and active duty components of the Coast Guard. Second, I want to echo your comments on Icebreaker, the Polar Security Cutter, at this point, I don't care what you call it. I've been at it for 18 years, and it's going to get built, and we're very happy about that. And I want to echo Mr. Gibbs' comments about timing and notification to us. We want to watch this closely. Admiral Busby, with regards to MARAD and the small shipyard grants, certainly want to see those continue. Last year, the committee enacted legislation requiring MARAD to post a notice of funding within 15 days of Congress appropriating funding for the program. In the first year of the new law, MARAD already missed the deadline, which was last Saturday, March 2nd. And I'm wondering when the notice of opportunity will be posted.
It's out, sir.
It is out? Excellent. When was it out?
It was out the next day, I believe it was. We were just.
Maybe the 4th. Maybe not Sunday, but maybe the 4th.
It was, yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. And with respect to the 2020 budget, I know we're always reluctant to say, give us exact numbers. Will there be a number higher than 0 in the president's budget for small shipyard grants?
I can say, sir, that we strongly support the program. We like it a lot, and we know it gets great benefit to the shipyard community.
Just say it's going to be higher than 0. That's all I'm asking.
That's all I can say, sir.
Oh, got it. I understand. I'll take that as a positive. Admiral, I'm sorry, is it Nadeau or Nadeau? Nadeau, Admiral Nadeau. In the Northwest, Pacific Northwest, the safe transportation of crude oil is a priority. We've got 4 refineries in the Puget, 5 actually, in the Puget Sound, North Puget Sound area, and there's a major project across the border in Canada, in Burnaby, British Columbia, and last month, the Canadian National Energy Board recommended approval for the Trans Mountain Pipeline Extension Project, otherwise we call it TMX or TMX. As a result, the number of vessels transporting crude out of that facility will go from about 1 per week to about 1 per day if it's finally approved, and those vessels will be coming south of the Salish Sea and then taking a hard right around Vancouver Island and then going out to the Strait of Juan de Fuca and then out to the Pacific, presumably on the Canadian side. But if there's oil spills, there's not a wall at the border in the water, and so the question really has to do with, from your perspective, about the available sources the Coast Guard has in the region and capacity both to respond to an oil spill as well as a planning taking place with your partners in the Canadian Coast Guard in the event of a final approval of TMX.
Sir, it is a little bit outside my wheelhouse, but I can speak in more general terms in that we do have a robust framework in place to address those risks and those threats, and that we require both the ship operator have plans in place and the support in place that they can call upon should they have an incident. The network, and I know we have a close working relationship with the Canadians and our District 13 partners with them, and I think we actually have joint plans. So, and through the whole infrastructure that is the area committee and the regional committees that all work together to prepare and plan and make sure they're ready should we have the misfortune to experience that type of event.
Well, it's certainly a challenge to us because it's a project that's on the other side of the border, so we don't have a lot of regulatory tools to address those the issues that come with it, but we do have some because of our strong working relationship with the Canadians on a variety of issues, including the Coast Guard. So I think what I'd like to then follow up with you on or with the Coast Guard on is just to have you all come in, walk through those parts where you are cooperating with the Canadian Coast Guard, specifically on this project in terms of planning for it in the event that it's finally approved.
Yes, sir, we can arrange that.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Mr. Graves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to congratulate you in the new position. Looking forward to working with you, and also want to congratulate Ranking Member Gibbs for the leadership position on the subcommittee. A few quick questions, Admiral. There was a moratorium that the Congress passed in the TWIC reader rule that prevented full implementation. Can you give us an idea of when the Coast Guard will be providing a report to Congress on that issue?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. Currently, DHS is responsible for providing a report back to Congress, and they are working with their FFRDC and have contracted that out, and we are supporting that effort and partnering as we're called upon to help them complete and conduct that analysis. Once complete, we look forward to having that report as well. I'm sure it will be delivered here, and we will use that then to inform where do we go next with the TWIC reader rule.
So you're not clear on when we can expect it?
We would expect to see a draft soon, but I don't know. It gets delivered to DHS, and then it gets delivered to you all.
Yep.
I don't have an estimate on that, sir.
Okay. Next question. I think National Academies and perhaps GAO suggested on the Polar Icebreaker that the Coast Guard do detailed design before moving forward on construction. Do you have an understanding of what the Coast Guard's plan is there for acquisition? As you know, the appropriations bill done a few weeks ago does provide a significant amount of funding for that. I know Mr. Larson and Congressman Maloney and many other folks are involved in that. Just want to get your read on progress there.
So, sir, I can't speak to that specific provision that the Academy recommended. What I can tell you is we're extremely grateful for the support that we received to recapitalize and build a new polar security cutter. That $650 million will enable us to award and continue design and award contract before the end of the fiscal year, working closely with the Navy and an integrated program office. We're marching along, and we have everything we need to keep going on track. But I don't know if that gets to your specific question, sir. That might be a get back we got to provide.
If you could, again, I'm not certain if it was GAO, National Academies, or both, but there was a recommendation that the Coast Guard complete detailed design before moving to construction. So if you could get back to the committee on that, I'd appreciate it. Last question, and really just both of you, just kind of throwing this out there. You know, it's amazing that in the committee memo, they talk about, and I apologize, I missed your testimony, so I might be asking you to repeat something, but I'm just going to read you 2 lines out of here. The percentage of international commerce cargoes carried on U.S. flag vessels have fallen from 25% in 1955 to approximately 1.5% percent today. Over the last 35 years, the number of U.S. flag vessels sailing in international trade dropped from 850 to 82 vessels. There have been rumors about the administration perhaps looking at tweaks to Jones Act requirements. I'm just curious, looking at some of these staggering statistics, looking at some of the challenges you've had in Defense Industrial Base and even in some of the vessels that you need to acquire, do either of you have any comments on that trend? If changes to the Jones Act would exacerbate that, any thoughts or reaction?
I'll go ahead and start, sir. You know, the internationally trading fleet, which carries commerce outside of our domestic, is really kind of a separate.
Well, but Admiral, let me see if I can maybe hone in on my point. If we're seeing it dropping off like that, if we're going to not have a robust domestic fleet or domestic defense industrial base here, the shipyards to actually build these ships, wouldn't that actually further drive up the cost of having ships in the United States, U.S. flag ships, U.S. built ships, and wouldn't that further challenge our ability to compete on a level playing field internationally?
The Jones Act is enabling that that's the business for those shipyards. We're not building any internationally trading ships in our shipyards today.
If we poke holes in the Jones Act, though, doesn't that further undermine our shipbuilding capacity domestically?
Absolutely.
And that would that raise concerns with you?
Absolutely, it would.
Admiral?
Sir, the Jones Act is a long-standing 100-year statute on the books. It does a lot of things. I would only offer that if anyone's going to start tinkering in there, you got to be mindful of second, third-order effects that might occur.
Potentially negative, and just because something's old doesn't mean it's good, but in this case, I think that it does actually provide significant protection. I remember Admiral Zunkoff last year actually said that the Coast Guard's not outfitted to properly secure U.S. ports if we do poke holes in Jones Act.
I believe that's what Admiral Zunkoff said. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Lowenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to again serve on the Maritime Subcommittee in this Congress. I look forward to working with my colleagues, and especially I want to include my co-chair of the Ports Caucus, Randy Weber, to address some of the critical issues that face our ports and our maritime industry. You know, ports across the country have applauded the inclusion of 293 million for the Port Infrastructure Development Program, which is at MARAD, which is included in the most recent appropriations language. As we all know, ports face significant challenges from rising volumes, increased congestion, and the need to lower harmful emissions. Those are three critical things that ports are all confronted with. And so I'm hoping that this program, this newly included infrastructure development program, will provide a strong federal partnership to make these needed investments to modernize our ports, and also the terminals included within the port. So, Admiral Busby, my first question is to you. Can you give us an idea when we can expect to see the notice of funding opportunity for this program? And when does MARAD plan to award grants for this program?
Thank you for the question, sir, and thank you to the Congress for that very generous infusion of money for ports.
Yes.
Very critical. I mean, ports are our gateway to our economy. So to get them operating as efficiently as we can is very, very important. We are working really hard right now with the Secretary's office to get the NOFO put together to bound how that program is going to be administered. We're working through to ensure we understand the guidance from Congress so that we get the proper instructions into the NOFO when it goes out. I would expect it would be out in a matter of several months.
Several months?
Yeah, to get that out, probably toward certainly this year, to get out. And
So if we had another meeting in June, you would think that it'd be out June, July?
My guess, and we're proceeding right along. Believe me, we're having meetings quite frequently to get that. We're anxious to get that out there. We're anxious to get that process in place.
Thank you. How about the eligibility? Maybe you might tell us about what type of projects you hope to support with these funds.
Well, there's a number of different projects. You know, I think we're looking to how do we, as I mentioned, make these ports more efficient? How do we account for the flow of cargo? You know, we have gigantic ships that are coming much larger than these terminals have handled in the past, upwards of 18, 20,000 TEUs.
Even larger.
Right. So, you know, ships, this massive amount of cargo is going to be flowing, and it has to flow out through rail lines, through highways, and through our marine highways. So upgrading that flow, I think, is going to be a big focus probably for a lot of ports and terminals that put in for this grant money.
Thank you. I have a question for the Coast Guard, a little different. You know, the development of offshore wind farms is growing steadily, especially along the East Coast. BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is responsible for the overall development of offshore energy with input from other federal agencies. So my question is, as the federal agency that's charged with ensuring safe navigation, what's the Coast Guard's role in the development of offshore wind farms?
Thank you for that question, sir. We have an active role in that, as you stated, and it's primarily in the navigation safety. We are in support to BOEM as the lead federal agency for the permitting and the development of that activity, but we are plugged in with them and engaged. In fact, we have an MOA that we signed them a couple of years ago that clearly outlines our roles and responsibilities, and we're active with them on a reoccurring basis where we meet with them, discuss, and try and deconflict. We think this can be done right. It has to be mindful, and the right stakeholders have to come to the table. We're committed to working with our other federal partners to ensure all stakeholder needs are addressed and considered as part of that process.
Thank you. I have one last question, and maybe you can just, in a brief answer, does the Coast Guard have the authority to ensure the safety of vessels and workers during wind farm development activities?
We would regulate the safety and of the workers on U.S. flag vessels, but depending on where the activity is taking place, we may not have jurisdiction or authority. If you're on a foreign vessel, more than 12 miles offshore, my sense is depending on what that vessel is doing, we may not have the jurisdiction over that activity. That would be left to BOEM in that case.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I'd just like to note that we've been joined by the chairman of the full committee, Chairman Peter DeFazio, and without objection, I'd like to yield to the chairman if he has any remarks he might like to make at this time. I'd also like to congratulate him on his position as chairman of the full committee. Look forward to working with him.
Well, Mr. Chairman, first, I'm sorry I couldn't be here for the testimony in the beginning. I was over, Ways and Means was holding the first meaningful hearing since 2010 on funding infrastructure. So I thought it was important I'd be there to
Starting on a bipartisan note.
to encourage them to move quickly and robustly toward funding our infrastructure deficit. I just wanted, Mr. Chairman, to present you with this small token and
Thank you.
congratulate you on your chairmanship of the committee. I had a statement which doesn't seem to be reflected in my book here, which I rewrote. That seems to be the earlier pablum statement I got. But I feel very strongly about the Jones Act, and you know, I was very pleased that hopefully that's not what's in here. Yeah.
That's yours.
Yeah, I think. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, this is better. You know, because the president's executive order to facilitate the movement of personnel from active military service into the merchant marine, I think, is great. But it would be ironic if there wasn't a merchant marine for them to move to. We're seeing, you know, the governor of Puerto Rico following on, you know, the myth that Puerto Rico pays a premium for its freight service from Jacksonville and elsewhere, is pushing for future exemptions under the Jones Act for potential future shipments of LNG, et cetera. It's just the oil and gas industry trying to get their foot in the door to disestablish, you know, what is a very successful U.S. You know, story in terms of maintaining at least a minimal merchant marine capability, shipbuilding capability, and that. And if we undermine the Jones Act, we won't have that anymore. I also, in that testimony, referenced the fact that the Coast Guard was the only uniformed military service not paid during the shutdown. And it was ironic in talking to the Commandant, I think it was the Commandant, I had numerous conversations with numerous people in the Coast Guard about them escorting the submarines to Bangor. So the sailors and the subs are getting paid, but the coasties on top of the water providing the security weren't. There's a little bit of, more than a little bit of irony to that. And also the president made it all very much about drugs. You know, former Commandant Admiral Zumwalt observed that we only act on 20% of our actionable intelligence to intercept drug shipments, and yet the Coast Guard interdicts more drugs than every other agency of the federal, state, and local government combined. And there is a lot more out there if they had additional resources. So I just want to thank the Coast Guard for being here today. I want to thank the chairman for convening this important hearing, and hope you enjoyed that gavel.
Thank the gentleman, and I am particularly glad I yielded, given that there was a presentation of a gift, which I was unaware of, but I'm very grateful for it. And I appreciate appreciate. I think I'll leave that right there. Thank you very much, sir. And I've offered the Republicans offsetting time, which has been graciously declined by my colleague, Mr. Gibbs, but I do want to recognize Mr. Weber. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll take that time if it's still available. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go a little bit different route. Most of y'all know that I have Texas A&M Maritime Academy at Galveston in my district. And so I'm very interested in workforce, the training, and the like. In your testimony, Admiral Busby, you said there's 61 government-owned vessels maintain and reduce operating status. Do you know where those are stationed?
Yes, sir. They're stationed on all three of our coasts, Atlantic coast, Gulf Coast, and Pacific Coast, spread in groups of typically 3s and 4s.
Okay.
A few many.
But there is a group, Sabine H's waterway over by Beaumont.
Yes, sir. We have one of our reserve fleets there.
How many ships is stationed there, do you know?
Let's see, 2, 4, there's 4 Ready Reserve Force ships there, and then a number of ships in the National Defense Reserve Force that are in longer-term layup there.
Well, I'm going to be pushing for my colleagues, talking to the great chairman from our whole full committee, that Sabine H's waterway, as you know, has an authorized chief's report to be dredged to deeper depth, and we certainly need that. The Port of Beaumont, for our friends here on the committee and those listening, sends out more military personnel and equipment than any other port in the other 49 lesser states in the country. And I just want to make sure I get that in the record. So any help we can get from y'all in getting that dredged will be greatly appreciated.
The gentleman would yield for one brief second.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
I certainly intend to address the harbor maintenance tax, fully expending the harbor maintenance tax, and I've been working with the Budget Committee on the hope of spending down the $10 billion balance that has already been sequestered with needs like yours. It could be well spent.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Count me as a supporter of that idea. Let's use the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for, who knew, harbor maintenance, you know. So I appreciate that. The number of maritime academies, is it, you pronounced your NETO, the number of maritime academies, Admiral? How many?
I could defer to my friend next door, but I believe it's 6 plus 1, that right,
six.
Buzz?
Federal Academy at Kings Point plus 6 state.
Right. You would happen to know which academy has the oldest, smallest ship, would you?
Yes, sir.
And Admiral Busby, which one would that be?
The Texas A&M Maritime Academy in Galveston.
Darn, you don't say.
I do say, sir.
Well, Mr. Chairman, are you still with us?
Actually, the smallest, not so much the oldest. The oldest actually is at State University in New York. They have the
Right.
oldest
Well,
by a long ways.
As you know, the General Rudder only houses 15 cadets, and what does that one hold?
About 600.
About 600. Gosh, I'm thinking that's a little bit higher number. So we're obviously pushing for a ship to get funded, Mr. Chairman, in the appropriations coming up for a new ship for Texas Academy. Of the 6 academies that we have, Admiral, Busby, this may be for you. What are the capacities of the varying ships?
Well, the Empire State is right around 600.
Okay.
The Kennedy, which is the second largest and second oldest, is just shy of 600. It's almost the same capacity.
Okay.
The State of Maine and the Golden Bear, which are sister ships, they're on the order of about 350, I want to say. And then the General Rudder and the State of Michigan, which are sister ships also, they're on the order of 50.
Okay. Okay.
That's at a time.
So we can see the disparity there, and so we certainly want to make that case for those of my friends here on the committee. You also talked about LNG bunkering, and you're probably aware that 95% of the nation's LNG really is exported from the Sabine-Neches waterway, the second longest waterway in the Gulf Coast, second only to the Mississippi River. Of course, it does have Cheniere Energy. Did we lose Mr. Graves? It does have Cheniere Energy in those calculations, but the Sabine-Neches Navigation District is responsible for making sure that LNG gets out. It is obviously a coming industry. Do either of you know what percentage of those ships being built, are they all tankers that are going to be using LNG, or they're container ships? Do you know any of those stats?
Are you talking U.S.?
No, the new ones around the world that are going to be
Around the
using LNG.
So we're seeing development both in cruise liners, some I'm thinking like 25% of the new cruise ships that are on order right now will be LNG fueled. We've seen other container ships, some of the big container ships that are operating around the world, switching to LNG as fuel. And I have not heard of any bulkers yet, but there's more and more development depending as the infrastructure around the globe develops and fuel becomes available, particularly those that are on a known trade route. It's very attractive.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chairman Maloney and Chairman DeFazio, Ranking Member Gibbs. First of all, it's an honor to be able to serve with all of you on the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Subcommittee. I look forward to the work that we'll do together this term. The U.S. maritime industry is essential to ensuring long-term stability and security for our country, from supporting commerce within our own waters to providing aid to our security efforts abroad. The U.S. maritime industry is a critical element of our economic and military power. However, the maritime industry's strength is not guaranteed, and American dominance at sea is currently being challenged and threatened. And we face numerous challenges that we have to address. In order to combat these challenges, it's imperative, I believe, that the Maritime Administration issue the National Maritime Strategy, which is years overdue. Admiral Busby, without a national maritime strategy, it's my belief that Congress does not have all the tools that we need to best support the U.S. maritime industry and ensure long-term competitiveness for U.S. flagged vessels. I understand that no timeline has been established for the release of the report. GAO has recommended that a timeline be established. Can you give us an update on the progress of developing the National Maritime Strategy and when we might expect to see it? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. And if I may, Congress has extended our deadline for the report to February of 2020. So technically, we're not late under the new extension, and obviously, we're striving mightily to make sure we deliver products by then. I would agree with you wholeheartedly that a national maritime transportation strategy is really vital for all of us in the industry to be able to stack hands along with Congress to have a common way forward and agreed way forward. The strategy is currently in routing with the administration. Part of the delay was to ensure that our strategy meshed up and is coordinated well with the national defense strategy and national security strategy, because they're all complementary and they really need to be in sync with one another. So that's what's going on right now with the strategy.
So that's early 2020.
February of 2020.
February
yes,
20.
sir.
Thank you. And Admiral Nadeau? That'll work, sir. Okay. Admiral. First name Rear, last name Admiral. As you know, Chairman DeFazio referenced
Spoken like an army man. Yeah.
The president signing the executive order last week to help bolster the military to mariner program. I did arrive late at the hearing. Perhaps you've spoken to it. Can you talk to me a little bit about the program and how many military members and veterans have received credentials under this program? And I understand that the pool of credentialed mariners is declining. How many credentialed mariners are there, and is that number, in fact, decreasing?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. We point out that we currently have about 200,000 credentialed mariners. How many of those are active? It's difficult for us to say. Our system is not set up to track, and I think we know that we need a better way to track and support the needs of MARAD so they can know who's available and what it's their availability and when could they serve. We have been working on this for some time. We use recommendations from our advisory committee, MERPAC, to help us establish the right way to move forward and give us advice and recommendations to not just the Coast Guard, but to all the services, to how we can best take the training and education and mirror that to the international standards so they can get credit for the experience and the training they receive. We have about, we believe, our system is not set up to track how many veterans or people coming with military service, but we kind of added an ad hoc system. We started in 2016, and to date, I want to say it's about 2,000 folks that we know had military service that have now transitioned and have a actual credential that they're using. And we've done a lot of things along the way to make that easier, including transcriptive sea service, where they can easily map their time and credit that towards their credential.
So I would just say that if accurate tracking of mariners is important, then be sure to, make the appropriate requests of Congress how we can support you in more accurately tracking the mariners that are active.
Yes, sir.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman, and this time I'd like to yield to the ranking member for a quick question in the spirit of accommodation.
Just a follow-up question from the gentleman from California, Admiral. The Atlantic Coast Port Access Route Study was completed 3 years ago, and the question is, when is it going to be implemented? Because you identified the routes and the windmills and stuff, but when are you going to implement with the routes?
We are working to do that now, sir. Work has started, but I just would point out that while we wait to complete the work that needs to do, and it looks like a rulemaking will be necessary, it doesn't prevent us from today sitting down with all stakeholders as the permitting process works itself out. We are at the table with BOEM and the stakeholders to ensure that what we learn through that process is taken into account as they proceed with issuing permits. So we will look to implement regulations, but in the meantime, we don't ignore the fact that we have this very useful information. We ensure that that's taken into account to keep the waterways safe, secure, and that we don't sacrifice safety at the expense of some other development.
Okay, thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to you and to the ranking member. This is a really important subcommittee for me, being the representative from the Virgin Islands. I tell people back home that the reason that 7 nations over time owned the Virgin Islands was not because they wanted a vacation spot. It was first because of our agriculture, but more importantly, it was because of our geographic location and our strategic importance for national security interests, as well as for commerce. And with that being said, this committee and both of you are very important to us, both for a strategic location in terms of commerce and as well in terms of national security interest as well. Because, listen, there's a reason that Bluebeard, Blackbeard, and Redbeard had their homes on St. Thomas. It was very important to them in terms of their commerce. And unfortunately, in the 21st century, drug traffickers are very smart as well. And they are using the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico as security interests are blocking the movement of drugs into the United States through land going to the sea. And having the sufficient funds from the Coast Guard to be able to fight that is very, very important to us. So you have my support, both of you, in terms of creating what's needed in the budget fight and ensuring that you have the right amount of vessels and our ports are in the shape that they're supposed to be so that maritime work can be done. So with that, one of my first questions to you, Admiral Busby, is related to port infrastructure and how will resilient port design, maritime highway design, designation, and intermodal connections impact global shipping?
Thank you for the question, ma'am, and thank you for the support. Marine highways is development is a very large priority with the Department of Transportation and MARA in particular, because we see that mode as the mode with the greatest opportunity for expansion and capacity in the future. We're only going to be moving more things as population increases and as we see flow of goods around the world. So, our highways and our railroads are getting very crowded, as we all know, and air shipment is still pretty expensive. So our waterways, which our nation is blessed with, provides a natural route to move more and more goods. So to the extent we can continue to develop our marine waterways, I think is going to be to all of our national benefit.
I agree, and with that, sir, when you talk about LNG, my colleague sitting right next to me, the Virgin Islands, we actually have deep water ports. We're outside of the customs zone, and we already have an oil refinery. So LNG, you guys could bring it right to us. We'll take care of you. The other thing I wanted to ask about with regard to the Coast Guard is the support that you feel that you have from us and what you need from us, and particularly in the area of the Virgin Islands. And I'll ask you first with regard to drug trafficking and the need for additional ships and et cetera. What would you want that to look like to be able to fight within the Caribbean?
Not exactly within my current responsibilities, but I can speak in general terms, ma'am, and I would tell you that first, we are grateful to the tremendous support that we've received from Congress and the administration. We receive funding for our second OPC. We've got funding for 6 FRCs, 2 of which will go off to replace, recapitalize 6 that we have over right now in CENTCOM AOR. And sir, Mr. DeFazio, I appreciate your thanks that we had people there as well working with the Navy during the shutdown over actually in CENTCOM AOR that were not getting paid, but we stood to watch. We're very proud of them. Ma'am, to your question, we are grateful to the support. We are recapitalizing our assets. We recouped about $6 billion worth of drugs off the waterways last year, getting after those transnational criminal organizations where they're most vulnerable, which is at sea. We'll continue that. That is the Commandant's one of his top priorities.
And what about shoreside infrastructure? Is that I know that we often talk about the actual, when we talk about assets, we're talking about ships and your men and women who are out there fighting. But what about shoreside infrastructure to support the fleet itself?
We have an aging infrastructure there as well, ma'am. I believe we're up to about $1.7 billion in our backlog. Recent committee support through Congress, we've got some funding to start getting after that, but there's still a lot more work to be done to get after all of our backlog there.
Okay, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, gentlemen. And before I go to Mr. Pappas, I'd just like to advise the members that after Mr. Pappas's questioning, I'd like to move to the second panel without objection. Mr. Pappas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Admiral Busby and Admiral Nato, for joining us here today. Appreciate your thoughts, and I read the written testimony as I was out.
Neto.
Got it. Thank you. We've got a lot of French Canadians in my district, so I'll. Okay. Great. Excellent. I know it well. It's about a mile from my house. Well, since we're talking about New Hampshire, I'm very proud to represent the Granite State. 18 miles of coastline, smallest coastline of any state in the country. I represent all of it. But yet the maritime industry is absolutely critical to the seacoast economy of the state of New Hampshire. According to the American Maritime Partnership, more than $113 million annually is added to the economy from the maritime industry, and $75 million in workforce income is derived from that industry. I'm concerned a great deal about the size of the mariner pool. I know you've touched on that a great deal this morning, so I appreciate your responses there. One thing I wanted to raise, recently I saw something in the Wall Street Journal, a report on China attempting to hack U.S. universities and targeting information on U.S. maritime research. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that, if the Coast Guard or the Maritime Administration has looked into this to ensure that our universities have the technical assistance that they need to make sure that they're protected and that the information is secure.
I'm not familiar with that specific incident, sir, but I can tell you in general, in terms of cyber, we have stood up a Coast Guard Cyber Command and have built that expertise out and are leveraging that. In addition, we are looking to work with the stakeholders to ensure that there is sufficient guidance in place, that people know what to expect, that we continue to address all of the threats and hazards that may be coming. We do know that they present new risks. The cyber is a new world for us, but it's ever present, and the industry needs to take advantage of those efficiencies in order to remain competitive. So we don't want to impede their ability. We just want to make sure we're mindful of the risk, ensure that we have the proper resilience in place, and that redundancy is there, so that however we leverage this technology, we make sure that should it go away or should it be impeded somehow or should someone take it from us, we can continue to operate or deal with the consequences when that occurs.
Thank you. Admiral Busby?
Yes, sir. We are not doing anything directly with any of the colleges and universities. As Admiral Neto said, we're primarily focused on the ships and the infrastructure, the connections, the ports, the terminals, all those things that enable our maritime transportation system to flow. And we participate widely with industry and with other parts of the government to make sure we are as secure as we can be. But as you're seeing in that article, we're under constant attack every day, many times a day.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the response. The Jones Act seems to be working. I'm a big supporter. I'm wondering if you could just give us an overall comment of what the maritime industry would look like without the Jones Act.
Well, I would start because we would not have a maritime industry without the Jones Act, quite plain and simple. Without the majority of our unlimited tonnage mariners work on Jones Act ships. Those 99 large Jones Act ships, they employ the majority of the mariners that I'm going to need to man up those 61 government sea lift ships. Absent the Jones Act and the jobs that go with them, we're not taking those ships to war. We're not taking this country to war. It's as simple as that.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I thank the gentleman. And Admiral Neto, I think it is fair to say we have found every conceivable pronunciation of your name today.
Heard them all, sir. Thank you.
If you were fishing with Barack Obama and you caught a big fish, you'd say, "Hand me the Neto," right? Is that it? But you'll never forget. You'll never forget now. It's in your head. Sir, thank you very much. Thank you, Admiral Busby. Both of you, we are cognizant of the extraordinary service you have provided to our nation throughout your careers, continue to do so. I'll let you both know, we take our oversight responsibilities seriously, and we all have a role to play, but we respect very much the jobs that you do, particularly the men and women of the Coast Guard. Let me just reiterate, we appreciate you very much, and we share your commitment to that mission on this committee. Thank you. With that, we'd like to adjourn the first panel and move to the second panel, if we could. I just know for the record, I think I know for the record this is not our normal committee room.
Take care. Oh, sorry. No. It's like a permanent recline on this chair here or something.
Don't forget it. Try to pick on you, Chris. Everybody else had mispronounced his name before you got here. How you doing? His brother pronounced it? All right.
Sean, Neto O'Rourke.
Well, thank you all. Would like now to welcome our next panel of witnesses. We're joined today by Rear Admiral Michael Alfulthis. Sir, am I saying your name correctly? I can't do this again.
If you're having problems with the last admiral, you're really gonna have problems with mine. Alfulthis.
Alfulthis. No one will make the mistake I just made. Thank you, sir. Mr. Alfulthis, Admiral Alfulthis, President of the State University of New York, Maritime College, institution I know well. We're joined by Ms. Jennifer Carpenter, Executive Vice President and COO of the American Waterways Operators. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. Mr. John Crowley, President of the National Association of Waterfront Employers. Mr. Michael Roberts, Senior Vice President and General Counsel at Crowley Maritime, on behalf of the American Maritime Partnership. And Mr. Augustin Tellez, Executive Vice President, Seafarers International Union, on behalf of the American Maritime Officers, Masters, Mates, and Pilots, and Marine Engineers Beneficial Association, the Seafarers International Union. Thank you all for being here today. I look forward to your testimony. Ask unanimous consent that our witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, so ordered. As for the previous panel, since that written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. And with that, Admiral, you may proceed.
Good morning, Chairman Maloney, Ranking Member Gibbs, and members of the subcommittee. I am president of the State University of New York Maritime College, and I'm here representing the consortium of state maritime academies. I'm here today about three very important issues as they pertain to the training, education, and development of future mariners. First, the importance of the state maritime academies in producing licensed mariners for national defense and economic security. Second, the need to replace the fleet of aging state maritime academy training ships that are inextricably linked to our ability to train our students. And finally, the importance of employment and advancement opportunities for U.S. mariners. The 6 state maritime academies, along with the Federal United States Merchant Marine Academy, provide the pool of new mariners our nation needs for national defense and economic security. Collectively, the state maritime academies annually graduate approximately 900 new deck and engine license officers. This equates to more than 70% of the new U.S. licensed officers each year, with the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy producing the remaining 25% and another 5% working up through the industry ranks. All of these sources are important to ensuring a healthy mariner pool. The ability of the state maritime academies to produce licensed officers is accomplished through a unique federal-state citizen partnership. At SUNY Maritime College, student tuition and fees fund approximately 50% of our operating budget, and state funding accounts for over 47%. Federal support accounts for approximately 3%. The state maritime academies are grateful to Congress and the administration for the support provided, and as the fiscal year 2020 budget process progresses, we look forward to working with Congress to maintain the level of support received in fiscal year 2019. In addition to direct support, the federal government provides each state maritime academy with a training ship. The state maritime academies require modern vessels of sufficient size to provide the required sea time and training to meet licensing requirements. They are the primary and often the only means for cadets to learn, train, and earn federally required sea time for the U.S. Coast Guard Merchant Mariner license. These training vessels, owned by the federal government and operated by the State Maritime Academy, are also essential assets for humanitarian and disaster relief efforts, as they were for Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, Maria, Sandy, and Katrina. Recognizing the urgency of replacing the fleet of aging training ships, Congress has partially funded the National Security Multi-Mission Vessel, or NSMV, program. The fiscal year 2018 budget included $300 million for the first NSMV to replace the Empire State at SUNY Maritime College. The fiscal year 2019 budget included another $300 million for a second vessel to replace Kennedy at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. The NSMVs are designed as multi-mission assets to serve in humanitarian aid and disaster relief efforts, as well as training ships. The state maritime academies are extremely appreciative of the bipartisan and bicameral support for the NSV program and the 2 ships funded to date. To meet the training needs of the collective state maritime academies and have sufficient ships available to support other national tasking and missions, we request Congress continue to fund the NSMV program until 3 additional ships have been built and delivered. This will ensure adequate capacity for all state maritime academies' training requirements, while providing the flexibility to deploy the NSMVs in response to national emergencies. As others have testified or will testify today, an adequate pool of skilled U.S. citizen mariners is essential for national defense sea lift requirements and our economic security. While the state maritime academies and the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy currently produce an adequate supply of entry-level licensed officers, there's an estimated shortfall of 1,800 mariners to crew all U.S.-flagged commercial and government-reserved sea lift vessels for a sustained period of time of more than 6 months. We request strong congressional support for legislation and funding that strengthens and grows the U.S. maritime industry in order to provide the employment and advancement opportunities needed to recruit and retain sufficient number of licensed mariners for commercial and strategic sea lift requirements. So in summary, the state maritime academies and the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy are essential to producing a pool of entry-level licensed officers for national defense and economic security. Funding is needed to replace 3 additional training ships used by the state maritime academies in order to maintain our nation's ability to train mariners and respond to natural disasters. And full funding and expansion of current programs and new incentives and legislation are needed to provide employment and advancement opportunities for our mariners. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the Consortium of State Maritime Academies. I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Admiral Alfoudis. And next, Ms. Carpenter, you may proceed.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today alongside my colleagues from across the maritime industry. We are all in this together, and we deeply appreciate your leadership and support. It is great to see that every member of this subcommittee hails from a maritime state or territory. Today, I'd like to discuss 4 pillars that form the foundation of our industry's health and viability and the critical role that you play in preserving that foundation. Those pillars are the Jones Act, federal preemption, waterways infrastructure, and marine safety. First, the Jones Act, the basis for every dollar that our members invest in American-built vessels and every job they provide to American men and women. The Jones Act allows us to provide ladders of career opportunity and support hundreds of thousands of jobs in related industries nationwide. The human dimension of the Jones Act is equally compelling. High school graduates and military veterans can work their way up from the deck to the wheelhouse, becoming captains on towing vessels and making six-figure salaries. In addition, many of our member companies are still owned by the third, fourth, or even fifth generations of the same families. We don't see either of those things much in the U.S. economy today. The Transportation Committee has long been a bastion of bipartisan support for the Jones Act, as we saw most recently with your letter to Secretary Nielsen. We thank you for that and ask that you continue to support the law vigorously. Second, federal preemption. American farmers, energy producers, and manufacturers depend on our industry to move their products to market and to deliver the inputs and the raw materials on which they rely. And because our vessels can pass through the waters of a dozen states in the course of a single voyage, our industry depends on a coherent and consistent regulatory regime administered and enforced by knowledgeable federal agencies. The principle of federal primacy was a foundation of the U.S. Constitution and has consistently been applied to interstate commerce for more than 200 years. It has also been reflected in thoughtful bipartisan legislation, from the landmark Oil Pollution Act of 1990 to last year's Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. Thank you for passing VITA. It is important both for the maritime industry, which needed the national uniformity that only federal regulations can provide, and for the marine environment, which will benefit as the highest standards economically achievable are implemented nationwide. We urge you to continue to ensure the primacy of federal laws governing vessel operations and hold executive branch agencies accountable for actively defending federal authority in this field. The third pillar is waterways infrastructure, which is in urgent need of modernization and repair. Critical failures and unscheduled closures have occurred at locks throughout the system. If left untended, these problems will increase the cost of marine transportation and call its reliability into question. That would be devastating not only for our industry, but for the shippers who rely on us, and for air quality and highway congestion as well. Congress can continue to support waterways infrastructure by keeping the Water Resources Development Act on a 2-year reauthorization cycle and opposing additional taxation, tolling, or lockage charges on users of the inland waterways system. We're already paying our share, supporting a 45% increase in the inland waterways fuel tax in 2014. The fourth pillar is marine safety, our industry's franchise to operate. This responsibility falls primarily on us. Congress also has an important role to play. A quarter century ago, AWO developed the Responsible Carrier Program as a code of best practices for member companies. We later instituted a third-party audit mechanism to increase the integrity of our safety management system. Building on these industry-led initiatives, AWO worked with this subcommittee and the Coast Guard for more than a decade to develop comprehensive towing vessel safety and inspection regulations, which took effect last July. AWO members are committed to getting safer every day. Our goal is not simply to comply with the regulations, but to institute a culture of safety industry-wide. Please hold us accountable for the commitments we make. In addition, please help the Coast Guard to promote a culture of safety by ensuring that regulations, policy, and user fees don't disincentivize safety management systems. Congress can also help by eliminating regulations that have little positive impact on safety or environmental protection. In closing, I thank you for your support for our industry and ask for your continued support for the 4 pillars that enable us to serve our customers and our country. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Thank you, Ms. Carpenter. Now, Mr. Crowley, you may proceed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal, Mr.
Good morning.
Weber, both co-chairs of the Great Port Caucus.
That's why we're here, sitting up here.
My name is John Crowley, and I serve as president of the National Association of Waterfront Employers, a role I've held for 5 years. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss potential strategies to improve the regulation, economic opportunities, and competitiveness of our nation's maritime industry. We're here today because of our need for federal infrastructure investment accessible to port operators and greater coordination and transparency to ensure that regulatory requirements are implemented in a cost-effective manner. My first goal is to share with you the critical role that terminals play in our national economy and as a national asset. As terminal operators, our customers are the ocean carriers who move global commerce to and from the United States. We move the cargo from the water to the rest of the nation. U.S. port operators work off uniquely configured footprints with varied water and landward access, developing proprietary processes to optimize local productivity. Accordingly, port operators must be adaptive and forward-thinking, looking to leverage advanced infrastructure to ensure the operator's skilled workforce can meet the nation's multiple and dynamic needs. They require improved infrastructure to support the growing demands for economic opportunity throughout the country. I know this committee understands the strategic importance of moving freight and that ports require significant infrastructure investment. And I thank Congress for its leadership in providing focus on the importance of ports and the nearly $300 million for their use through the Port Infrastructure Development Program. However, more work needs to be done. While the funding and support that Congress has established sets a strong foundation, we firmly believe that port infrastructure needs will not be met with just single-year funding, no matter how robust. We urge Congress to support self-sustaining permanent funding specifically aimed at port operators, as well as the traditional port infrastructure development in a manner similar to the harbor maintenance tax and your efforts in that regard. We further seek to ensure that private port operators have access to available federal funding and potential loan guarantees, both through public-private partnerships and by ensuring direct port operator access and eligibility. Federal investment can have the largest impact when directly supporting port operators because port operators have the largest direct impact on improving intermodal productivity. This federal investment in port operators will result in the improved competitiveness of port operators. Each of these investments is an investment in a national asset which will remain with the port facility in support of future operations and operators. Operators in any business sector face regulatory oversight, and port operators are not different. Congress's efforts to ensure robust port security, a coordinated and environmentally sensitive port infrastructure, and a competitive port environment are important and necessary to maintaining this competitive business operation. While Congress's leadership establishes the standards, regulatory agencies implement the policy. Now we members work closely with federal agencies in pursuit of the nation's policy objectives. And when executive agencies take expansive views of their authority to issue interpretive rules or policy statements, the use of the Administrative Procedure Act is sorely needed in their regulatory development. Therefore, we recommend the creation of a coordinating committee dedicated to aligning agency actions with stakeholder input and provide unified recommendations to Congress. I believe that through the development of dedicated port infrastructure funding opportunities accessible to port operators, coordinated agency oversight, and reasonable and transparent regulations, Congress and the executive branch can ensure that U.S. ports and port operators are prepared to meet tomorrow's needs of the U.S. economy. I appreciate this subcommittee's continued support for U.S. port operators, and I look forward to working with you to develop the strategies to improve the regulation of port operators in future and new economic opportunities for our U.S. maritime transportation system. I'm happy to respond to any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Crowley. Next, we have Mr. Roberts. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for convening this hearing, and thank you very much for being here and caring about our industry. It's really important to us, and we really appreciate it. So I'm here on behalf of the American Maritime Partnership. AMP has represented nearly every segment of the domestic maritime industry for 24 years. Our common interest is in ensuring that America has a vibrant domestic maritime industry and that the legal underpinning for that to happen, the Jones Act, remains intact. A just released analysis by PricewaterhouseCoopers finds that more than 650,000 jobs are created by the American domestic maritime industry. This includes highly educated officers and engineers who graduated from our state and federal maritime academies to those with a high school education and vocational training who found a career home in the maritime industry. It includes thousands of military service veterans, as we've heard. The President just Monday recognized them and issuing an executive order that eases their transition into the industry. Please remember two things about these 650,000 jobs. First, they are vitally important to our national defense and our homeland security. The men and women who build and operate our commercial ships are the same people we rely on to respond to a national emergency. Many of them have served and continue to serve our country on ships involved in a variety of missions related to our nation's defense. The second point is that these jobs depend upon the integrity of the Jones Act. My written testimony discusses the fact that the Jones Act reflects the normal rule of law, that those operating in our home markets must obey American law and not the laws of Liberia or China or wherever a ship owner chooses to register their vessel. If the Jones Act is degraded and foreign ships are allowed to displace American ships in our home markets, there will not be American citizens who know how to build ships, and there will not be American citizens who know how to operate ships. And we will be exposing tens of thousands of miles of our coastlines and river systems to foreign ships and foreign mariners entering our country. Two subjects merit particular attention today: liquefied natural gas, or LNG, and Puerto Rico. Less than 2 weeks ago in San Juan, my company christened the Taino, which is one of the newest vessels delivered by an American shipyard. It is a beautiful ship powered by LNG, built in Mississippi by American workers and custom designed to provide direct, nonstop service to customers in the market between the mainland and Puerto Rico. With more than $1 billion in total investment by the carriers in that trade, Puerto Rico now has the newest, most efficient, most environmentally marine logistics system that exists anywhere in the world, employing hundreds of Puerto Rican Americans. With all that Puerto Rico has been through, these ships and this unique logistics system and the commitment to Puerto Rico's long-term economic health that they represent should be a source of great pride and hope on the island. These ships not only are fueled by LNG, but they also carry LNG in 40-foot insulated tanks to industrial facilities on the island. It is a new market that Crowley developed a few years ago to offer a more reliable and less expensive source of energy. As you know, Puerto Rico has asked for a 10-year waiver of the Jones Act for deliveries of U.S. LNG to the island. AMP strongly opposes this waiver for several reasons. It is way too broad. There are now at least a dozen projects under development at shipyards around the country. Granting the waiver would kill those projects and create uncertainty that could affect the entire maritime industry. Such a waiver granting such a waiver would also be illegal, as there is no national defense basis for it. Such a waiver would immediately be challenged in court, and the uncertainty that I just mentioned would be compounded. Finally, no case has been made as to why a waiver is needed. If there is a real near-term need for bulk deliveries of LNG to the island, the starting place to meet that need is with a solution that complies with the law and keeps the Jones Act intact. Having said this, if someone believes that a waiver is needed, the place to make that case is in Congress, in this subcommittee, and in the Senate counterpart, and not by asking the administration to twist the existing waiver law inside out. Let me finally say that we, Crowley and AMP, very much want Puerto Rico to succeed in rebuilding a modern and resilient power system and a powerful and diversified economy. The continued support of Congress is critical to Puerto Rico's success. Funding nutritional assistance and other support programs, continuing disaster recovery, relief, and infrastructure support programs. We have supported Puerto Rico in these efforts and will continue to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. And now, Mr. Telles, you may proceed.
Mr. Lowenthal, Ranking Member Gibbs, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. As the chairman mentioned, my name is Augie Tellez. I will only add to the people I'm representing today, the Maritime Trades Department, AFL-CIO, representing approximately 4 million working people in America today. End of written stuff. Too bad those other guys left, because now I wing it.
The best presentation so far.
I must add my name to those thanking the President and his administration for the executive order on the military to mariner executive order. Now we just have to make sure, as someone said, that there's an industry in which to employ them. As the world's foremost superpower, we've got to project our force to any spot on any given day on this planet. That force has to be maintained, sustained, supplied with all the stuff to do their job and then brought home. That role has fallen on the U.S. Merchant Marine in every conflict since the Revolution, and we've done that job admirably and at times with sacrifice. Sadly, today, the answer to the question as to whether we can recreate that effort is very unclear. We are at a critical time, and to reverse that critical situation, I think it's time for some bold moves. Bold moves, not in the sense that some have proposed that to make them more competitive, we should add foreign workers to do our job on ships, but boldness in the sense that it will create opportunities, untold opportunities for American seafarers in the future. If we are to be able to perform our wartime duties, then we have to be supported in peacetime. And in peacetime, cargo is king, and we rely heavily on preference cargoes. Every day we argue, should it be 75, should it be 50? Are the laws being enforced? Are they being complied with? Let's be bold. Let's apply 100% cargo preference to all government-impelled cargoes across the government. Let every federal agency buy, build, and ship American. End of argument. The Maritime Security Program is another linchpin in our peacetime fleet. It needs to be extended, expanded, and increased so that we can realize Admiral Busby's vision of a larger fleet that includes U.S. tankers to meet our military's fueling needs. LNG, we are becoming and have become a premier energy producer and exporter. Sadly, there is no U.S. flag involvement in that trade. Let us be bold and enact Mr. Garamendi's Re-Energizing American Shipbuilding Act into law, embrace it as a national energy policy. It will create thousands of jobs on land, in the shipyards, at sea, create a true trade for American companies to be involved in, and silence those Jones Act waiver demands for the transportation of energy. Let us be creative in recapitalization and the utilization of our ready reserve force and the surge fleet. Let us utilize it and man it smartly, operationally, so that we have not 9 men taking care of 3 or 4 ships, but an operational crew that's taking care of them, so that they truly become a ready and a reserve force. So you have a training platform and a manning platform that will answer the question of mariner shortage. Do not be fooled or confused by the number of 200 certificates issued by the Coast Guard. That number has no role in the question of whether we have enough mariners or not. Right now, our wartime requirements are about a little shy of 12,000 folks, 12,000 mariners. We have the capability of reaching back and probably grabbing hold of about 12,000 mariners. Whether each one of those will come to the fight remains a question. We meet our needs if everyone says yes. Those are the bold moves we need to make. There are other things included in all the testimonies, written testimonies, ad valorem tax, this measure, but I think the time is now to make these bold moves.
We cannot wait. If we act now, and I believe you have the ability, and in my humble opinion, you have the responsibility, not only to the legacy of all those who sacrificed before, but for the future mariners and for the future security of this nation, to make those bold moves. And someday when you ask me whether we can get the job done, the answer will be a resounding and an indisputable, yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to member questions. Should I do this, please? No. Okay, now we're going to move on to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'm going to start by recognizing myself. Mr. Crowley, I know it hasn't been easy, but terminal operators have been an essential part of our port's efforts to reduce emissions. They have played a critical role in this. For example, at my home port, which as you know is the Port of Long Beach, diesel particulates from cargo handling equipment has been cut by 93% from 2005 levels. NOx emissions are down 73%, while container volume has increased by 12%. This is very, very important progress, and I'm proud that the state of California and local partners, such as the industry itself, have committed resources to help with this effort. With state resources, we've funded demonstration programs for zero-emission handling equipment and rolling out charging outlets for cargo equipment at some of our busiest terminals. That's what we've kind of done. But we know that much of the investment in low and zero-emission equipment will come from private terminal operators. It's where much of it is going to come. So in both in your written testimony and in your oral testimony, you've talked about loan guarantees or low-interest financing programs as one way for Congress to spur investments at marine terminals. Can you dig a little deeper and tell us how you see that playing out and what is the scope of what you're talking about?
Thank you, Mr. Lowenthal, and again, appreciate your leadership in the Port Caucus and the efforts on behalf of ports. Thank you for the question. Certainly, port operators, the terminal operators support the goals of lower emissions and being good port stakeholders in the communities in which they live. It is, with that in mind, takes significant investment into those efforts, which are important to the nation and local communities, but deter from them getting to the productivity of the business that they're about, moving cargo. And that's part of our focus on trying to achieve more flexibility in receiving support for things that are broadly good and national goals in order to support the investments that can be done throughout the facility. Loan guarantees are, amongst other avenues, a means to support that investment in everything that gets done on the terminal operation. You know, we're reminded of Title 11 in the vessel construct of loan guarantees and support, not available today, certainly, and probably not prospectively available, but that sort of program as a dedicated means for a national asset would seem to be something that we could consider, and I'd be happy to work further with the committee and staff towards that end.
Thank you. I would like to work together with you on that. Also, you mentioned talking about how these loan guarantees or low-interest finance programs can help programs or projects that are, I think you mentioned the term broadly good in terms of the public's interest. But can you be more specific? What investments do you think our terminal operators right now would they make if we did provide these low-interest loans, if we did help them by providing the financing that they need to do this, the background, in terms of loans? What specifically do you think they would be focusing on?
The first dollar always goes to Mr. Lowenthal, to your question, to the things that are required as part of being good citizens in the community, such as the environmental matters that you previously questioned. But they reach to many other things, such as all the way to the development of better wharfs, stronger rails, to transit the larger cranes that are needed to efficiently and productively move cargo today. All of things which are don't run out of their useful life by the terminal operator standards, but are needed because of outside influences. And all of those things together are increasingly, over $1 billion for many entities.
Thank you, and I yield back. Now, Ranking Member Gibbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Roberts, in regard to Puerto Rico and the LNG Jones Act waiver, several questions there, but I guess a two-part first. Does the pending Jones Act waiver for carrying LNG to Puerto Rico argue the basis of national defense, and does waivers under Section 501 and Title 46 of the United States Code require national defense rationale for approval?
Mr. Gibbs, we see no basis for finding that there's a national security or national defense basis for issuing this waiver. It's entirely based upon an economic argument and the prospect of some potential future need that has yet to be identified.
Yeah, we agree because we sent the letter.
And we thank you very much for that.
Puerto Rico's current LNG needs, are they being met either through imports or by the Jones Act's qualified vessels carrying ISO LNG tank containers?
Yes, Mr. Gibbs, the one facility on the island that's physically capable of receiving LNG is under a long-term contract to receive from Trinidad, and that is working. The other demand on the island for LNG at this time is being met. It was created by our company, honestly, and that's being met through ISO tanks that are being carried on Jones Act vessels from the mainland.
Do you know if a 501 waiver has ever been granted to transport material to a facility which is not designed, has not been funded, has not been permitted, and has not been built, and does not exist?
That would be a unique application of that law.
But you don't know if it's ever happened, right?
It has not.
Okay. This, I guess, to Mrs. Carpenter and maybe Mr. Roberts too, about the towing vessel inspections. We talked about with the first panel under the subchapter M and the certificates of inspection, but about how many towing vessels choose to use third-party inspection and or choose the National Coast Guard inspection regime? Do you know?
Yeah, our experience with our members very much tracks what you heard from Admiral Netto earlier. About 80% of our members who have received certificates of inspection are using the towing safety management system option, which leverages third parties.
Also the certificate inspections, geographic restrictions. Is there a plan for allowing towing vessels to operate as response vessels beyond the geographical area in which their certificate of inspection is applied? And do geographical limitations of the certificate of inspection pose other problems for traditional towing vessel operations?
Yeah, so this is something that our members have an interest in, both as subcontractors to salvage and response organizations who may be providing services to vessel owners, but our members are also tank barge operators and towing vessels who are required to have response plans and rely on these response resources. So it's very important to us from both perspectives that we have a sufficient network of response providers whose vessels are properly outfitted and whose mariners are properly credentialed to do the work. We have encouraged all of our members to meet with their Coast Guard officer in charge marine inspection, to talk with them about the work that their vessel may do in the event of an emergency, and to make sure that they have the necessary certifications in place and that we have productive plans. I'll just add, we've been talking with our colleagues at the American Salvage Association who've expressed real concern concern here. We're very much interested in hearing their members' perspective as the folks who are doing the subcontracting to our members. If they see a gap, that's something we're going to want to work with them and with the Coast Guard and with this subcommittee.
Well, I do know the salvage
Bill.
industry has some concerns about this inspection process and how it's going on. I guess, Mr. Talley's, love your testimony, especially the beginning. I understand that, the Coast Guard, we've had talk about the military to mariner initiatives, and do you have any further ideas on improving these operations or other ideas to help preserve the experience of military mariners for use in the private sector? Ideas to help facilitate this.
2004, the industry through Paul Hall Maritime Center. Excuse me. In 2004, the industry through the Paul Hall Maritime Center and the Seafarers International Union created a accelerated veterans program. At that time, we were probably getting about 10 per class. That program today gets about 3 per class. Part of the reason, at some point, because we do not charge tuition, the VA stopped allowing these veterans to use their benefits to either pay for the documentation, to pay for transportation, to pay for all the paperwork and documents they need to come to school. What the executive order does, it clears that pathway. It allows them to use that money and also maintain their per diem. So for a married guy with a family, that per diem becomes very important while they're in school. The key there, again, is two things. The Coast Guard has to be able to give them equivalency for their seat time experience in the military, and then we have to have a job to put them to.
Yeah. Okay, well, I appreciate that, and my time's out.
Thank you, Ranking Member Gibbs. Next, Mr. Brown, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I think, 2 clarifying questions. One for Mr. Tellez, and good afternoon. Glad to be your host at your headquarters in
Glad to have
Camp
you.
Springs, Maryland.
Always glad to have you, sir.
Yes, indeed. So you mentioned a war, and I may have this inaccurate, so this is why it's a clarifying question. You said there's you see a 12,000 wartime requirement shortage in terms of the number of.
No, not a shortage.
Okay.
We're tracking about an 1,800 to 2,000, 1,800 to 2,000 manpower shortage to meet our military requirements. Sustainable. Surge we can handle, which is the initial. But how we replace those folks and keep it going, it's about an 1,800.
So does that military to maritime program, I mean, that helps address this shortage?
It helps address it, but the shortage is a potential shortage. You can't have people just sitting around waiting for something to happen. So if you bring them in and recruit them and train them, they can't just be sitting around waiting for the balloon to go up.
You can't retain them then.
You can't retain them. Yeah. So you have to be able to place them somewhere. We do the best we can putting them in what we have right now. That is our goal, and we're pretty successful at it. But to close that 1,800-man gap takes a lot more than just bringing in 200 or even 2,000 over a period of years veterans.
Thank you. And for Admiral Alfoltis, you had mentioned that, and this is again a clarifying question, that the academies produce sufficient number of merchant marine officers, yet somewhere in your testimony you talked about a shortfall. Can you just clarify that for me?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So the shortfall we're all talking is the same shortfall, about 1,800 mariners. We are producing, again, the number of mariners that we produce each year, entry level, certainly meets the need for, we believe, the need for entry level mariners. The issue is again, the retention issue. If they don't have jobs to continue sailing on their license and advance on their license to the more senior level mariners, we lose them. I think Admiral Busby testified, typically about the six to 10 year mark, that's where we're losing our mariners because some would just want to come to shore for a different lifestyle, but many are just hitting a wall where there's just not enough jobs available for all these mariners. And frankly, one of the issues we're having is finding enough, as my colleague here alluded to, we're having a hard time finding enough positions for the kids that are graduating. We have students that are graduating with an officer's license. They're taking jobs as able-bodied seamen, not even sailing as an officer, because there's not enough third mate positions available to them, because there's not enough ships for all the people who are graduating. So we're graduating a sufficient number. The trick, again, is to have enough positions for them when they graduate, enough positions for them to continue to sail and advance through their career.
And then just in terms of retirements, is that a challenge? Are you seeing, you know, a bubble? Or tell me about retirements and what that impact that's having on the shortage that you could see in a surge.
I'm going to concede to some of my other colleagues on that question. I produce the entry-level mariners, but I'll concede that to some of my other colleagues to possibly answer that question.
Two issues there. On the license side, part of the problem is that they're not retiring. And what happens is you have the top officer staying beyond and aging, and at the same time, his nominal replacement would be the chief mate going at the same time. So there is the potential that both of them will retire at the same time. And it takes maybe 8 to 10 years to create those positions. Where are you going to fill those gaps in? On the unlicensed side, we have probably about 24 folks retiring every month, but we bring in recruits every month also. So we try to maintain a balance there. The problem, again, that we're going to face is that the demographics are going to create a skill gap, whereas because there are not enough jobs, there's not enough opportunity, people are staying on beyond what they should do and clogging up that pipeline, so to speak. And that's the problem we're having, and we will be facing very, very shortly.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And now I turn to my colleague and co-chair of the Ports Caucus, Representative Weber from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Tellers, you said that the average retirement per month is two dozen?
On my union. That's within my union.
Oh, I got you.
International Union.
Okay. What's the average age, would you guesstimate?
Within my union?
Yes, sir. Those are retiring. I mean, is it 60? Is it 50?
It's over that, anywhere between 65 to 70.
So safe to say they get in the industry and they stay there a long time.
Once they get that salt in their blood, yeah, they're there for a while.
Okay.
They forget how to act on land.
Okay. Well, I'll leave that alone for right now. So I guess this is really kind of a question for all of you, and I'll start over here. How do we explain that there's a national security tie to our acting Secretary of Defense? Are y'all engaged in explaining that? Do you meet with him or his staff? Any thoughts?
I would say we engage with Military Sea Lift Command. We engage with U.S. Transportation Command. They are actually two of our greatest advocates, so there is certainly a dialogue between the DOD through MARAD to the state maritime academies. We do have that dialogue about what their needs are and how we can meet their needs. And I would say some of our strongest advocates for things like the Jones Act and Need for Mariners are actually DOD.
So you're having that ongoing dialogue. I don't know if that means an annual meeting. You're trying to. The last thing we want is a national emergency that all of a sudden we have to make. Since he's charged, or the secretary's charged with giving the waiver, the last thing we want is to try to explain that in an emergency. So this is an ongoing. What do you call it? Continuing ed training session, Mr. Crowley. Are we meeting with him or his staff?
I'd have to defer on many of these manning issues to the other colleagues here. I'll say with respect to terminal operators, there's a continuing negotiation with the logistics staffs for outflow and inflow of supplies.
Mr. Roberts, your thoughts?
Yes, there is an organization called the National Defense Transportation Association.
Okay.
Admiral Busby was the president of that.
Okay.
Before taking his current position, they meet on a regular, and that's
Good to hear.
that is the association that facilitates the interface between Transcom and its component commands and the industry to stay ahead of this, and there's a very good dialogue there. I think that organization is very successful.
Good to hear. Mr. Tellers, your thoughts?
I serve on something called the Executive Working Group over at Transcom, and that's peacetime. It's probably a quarterly meeting.
Okay.
We have met with the former secretary and his.
Okay. Let me
So
move on.
It's an ongoing.
That's what I like to, Ms. Carpenter. Let's go to you real quick.
I would just say, we talked about the lack of a national defense reason for a 10-year waiver to move LNG to Puerto Rico. If we give Jones Act
For those
waivers-
non-existent facilities?
If we give Jones Act waivers where we don't have a national defense emergency, we will find ourselves with a national defense emergency.
That's part of the fear, right?
We won't have a domestic maritime industry.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Tellers, you said you think there's about an 1,800 mariner shortage, and then you said that you could sustain the surge, but it wasn't sustainable. I think you said something like that. So define the difference in numbers between handling a surge and handling something sustainable.
Well, in surge, and we do worst-case scenario in conjunction with MARAD, we meet, and we consider surge and worst-case scenarios utilizing everything that floats. And to have everything that float sail into the war zone would require about 11,500 or 60.
Okay, and I've only got 47 seconds left. Thank you. So what's the number one thing we can do to encourage shipbuilding in this country? I'll start real quick. Short, please.
Build 3 more NSMVs.
Well, and I've got a name for one of them, Mr. Crowley.
I think I defer to other members of the panel.
Mr. Roberts?
Well, I think defending the Jones Act and I think looking at the revitalizing the shipbuilding, Mr. Garamendi's bill.
Okay,
Create the requirement, create cargo.
sure. Well, that's trade, balance of trade. And I hate to be specific, but dare I call it Trinidad or Trinidad, having a contract with Trinidad, anybody know what the length of that contract is, Ms. Carpenter?
It was 10 years.
It was 10 years.
Yeah, I don't
Because
know.
we sure like to sell them some from Texas, I'm just saying.
Right now they're booked, but you
Yeah,
got to get in line.
I think I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And now that we've gone through this round of questions, and I want to ask any further questions from members of the panel. I know that Ranking Member Gibbs.
Thank you, Chairman. Just kind of follow-up question to Mr. Crowley's testimony, talking about, it was Congress's, really, I think, intent, the Committee on the Marine Transportation System serve as a coordinating agency to align the different thoughts of different agencies, authorities with stakeholder in part. What actions do you think that we need to take as members of Congress to make this happen? And I was looking at your testimony, talk about the different agencies here.
Yes, Mr. Gibbs, I appreciate the question. One of the ways to look at it is if you're calling someone from the administration to testify as to the health or the challenges of the port operator in this industry, I think your challenge is to find who that is. And so we end up with, at times, for example, overlapping security regulations by 2 members of the same department on the same facility security plans, providing a redundancy and a cost that distracts us from other worthy efforts.
So we really need to somehow align the marine transportation, this I saw on your testimony, forget the name of it here.
There are, if I may, I
Yeah.
think I know where you're going,
Yeah.
Mr. Gibbs. There are committees that exist now, but they're primarily intended to advise individual secretaries and heads of agencies on their own status and where their how their work is evolving. We find, and the Hanjin bankruptcy is a good example, that there are multiple agencies trying to help out in a case like that, none of which had any coordinating mechanism across the board that had been instituted, and we find ourselves more answering questions than getting help for the challenges that the ports also face.
It's the old saying, the right hand and left hand doesn't know what's going on, right?
This is a diverse community, and it has generated diverse sponsorship within the administrations and you know, across the effort. Understandable, but we call upon the administrations, the agencies to do the same sort of work we have to do, which is make sense of the various requirements in the policies to make them efficient and productive for our nation's economy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask any of the members, are there any more questions? Not hearing any more questions, I'd like to thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. Your contribution to this discussion has been very helpful. It's been very informative. And I would like to now ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. And I ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information that's submitted by members or witnesses, which will be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, that is so ordered. If no other members have anything to add, this committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, sir.